All right, this is Ed Carbajal speaking with. I've mentioned his website so many times on the podcast. Erik Magraken of Combat Sports Law. Erik, I know I broke your balls a lot to get on this podcast to do this today. I really do appreciate it. Generally, when somebody blows me off, I don't really chase him, but you do so much good work for just for the education of fight fans and athletes that compete and stuff like that. You're someone that the work you do is matters more than my own ego. So thank you so much for making time to come on.
Yeah, no, Ed, thanks for having me on. It's nice to meet you, and persistence is a good thing. So I didn't mind you following up. Happy to be on.
Well, I mean, again, the stuff you've been doing, I mean, I honestly think you've been running that website, Combat Sports Law. I actually made the banner for folks. I mentioned it. I was saying before we started recording. I've mentioned your website so many times when we talk about things going on in the business of fighting, when it comes to not even just that. I mean, because you've shared information about like CTE and just stuff like that in general. So, how long have you been running the website?
Yeah, it's coming on 10 years now. I forget the date I launched it, but I think it was just over 9 years ago. And I started the website just after attending a local fight. It was the first time post law school that I went to a live fight card, and I just sort of started digging into the legalities behind the event. And that event ended up being a smoker. It was illegal because back then, all non-boxing full contact cards in Canada were illegal. And so from there, I just started digging into the regulatory side of the sport. And I thought I'd run out of things to talk about after a while, but here I am 10 years later, still digging into these stories.
Yeah, and they really do need to be dug into, especially with the growth of the sport from back then to now. One of the things that I enjoyed, I mean, there's guys like, I know Luke Thomas has tagged you in tweets just because of your expertise and your background. For folks that aren't aware, can you just let folks know your background? And I mean, it's not just a blog you're running; you actually do have expertise in the field.
Right. Well, I'm by background a personal injury lawyer, so I sue people for a living. I've done that for close to 20 years now. Graduated law school back in 2002, and I've practiced almost exclusively in injury law for those 2 decades. On the combat sports side of things, I don't have any wonderful pedigree. I'm a licensed MMA judge with the BC Athletic Commission. I'm a licensed kickboxing judge. I'm a licensed pro boxing judge. So I understand combat sports. I'm involved with them, at least on the administrative side of things. And I'm a hobbyist practitioner. I've enjoyed the sports most of my life. But it's just the intersection of those 2 knowledge bases. So understanding administrative law, understanding how athletic commissions work, understanding how these sports work, understanding how they're regulated. And as an injury lawyer, understanding health and safety issues, be it weight cutting, or be it brain injury, or be it just safe regulation of sport, all that stuff sort of is mixed together and running around through my head when I'm watching these sports and I'm listening to the stories and I'm commenting on things.
Yeah, and that's one thing I notice about it. I mean, I know we follow each other on social. We've been probably for a while, but I know for a fact I've been following you longer than you were following me, just because I created Twitter out of I wanted some more Dropbox space or something, like 10 years ago. And then I kind of fell into covering the sport of mixed martial arts. And you've always shared so much knowledge that's what drew me to your website and drew me to you. And then eventually we wound up following each other. If you don't mind, I actually have your website. I want to bring it up here because you do bring it. I mean, you're never out of it's never old stuff. Like you talk about the Florida licensing standards and stuff here. So is it just your own, I guess, not your curiosities and I guess things that irk you that make you dive into these things and start writing about them?
Yeah, I think that's really just about it. The website started, I mentioned I went to this, basically smoker event, and I dug into how it's legal and it wasn't. And what fascinated me is it wasn't even really a smoker. Like it was legally, it's a smoker. It wasn't a lawful event, but nobody cared. Everybody thought it was above board. It was advertised. It's on television, all that kind of stuff. And it just sort of blew me away that the laws are being violated with society turning a collective blind eye. And that then, around that time is when MMA, a push was being made to amend Canadian laws to let MMA be illegal. And so the criminal code federally was overhauled, and then provincial commissions were created. And so from there, I just started digging into various, in the US state commissions and in Canada provincial commissions, and how they're doing their business. Like I just sort of dorked out on this stuff. And again, I thought over time I'd just naturally lose my interest or move on. But, like you mentioned, Holyfield here, 58 boxing, licensed out of Florida. Yeah. The stories just seem to keep popping up on my radar. And I don't get paid for Combat Sports Law. I've never tried to monetize the site. I do it because I enjoy doing it. I've had some folks reach out to me over the years offering me paid gigs writing, but I think that would zap all the joy out of it. Like I talk about these things because I find them interesting and because I'm not compelled to talk about them. So there's no deadlines. I don't have a quota. I don't have to get out so many articles per week or month. So if 2-3 months go by and nothing piques my interest, I'm quiet other than talking trash on Twitter. But on Combat Sports Law, yeah, really, if health and safety or other regulatory issues get on my radar, then I talk about them. And if there's not much for me to talk about, I don't mind a month or two going by. I don't feel any pressure to crank out these articles.
Yeah, I mean, not for nothing. I mean, you just said like it's something you do out of passion, and that's something I can appreciate as somebody that, I mean, like I cover the sport. I don't make a lot of money doing it. When I started, I didn't make a lot of money doing. I didn't make any money doing it. And I mean, it came over time, and it's nice. But if you're not passionate about anything that you pursue, then it really can be something that you definitely would brush off. And I'm glad you didn't do this, because I've learned so much from reading your stuff. I mean, again, like dummies like me and Matt, that my co-host on this podcast, that unfortunately couldn't be with us right now. Some of us, especially him, I'm going to break his balls a little bit because he's not here, but especially him, because one of the things that I always kind of get on him about, and I think we're all guilty of this, when we're watching these fights, we become the Just Bleed fan, like, that meme that you see with the Just Bleed. Like a lot of us were watching it and we get bloodthirsty and we're enjoying it or whatever, but then it's almost like we forget that some of these guys are getting taken for a ride with their contracts, and then we forget like all the damage that's done behind the scenes that they carry with them. And I mean, I know you watch and you live tweet with the fights, and do you ever find yourself dancing on that razor yourself? Like, I mean, man, I really enjoy what I'm watching, but some of this stuff I kind of have to write about the messed up part of it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the best way I could answer it is, yes, I have grappled with that reality. Like, this is dangerous and in many ways very ugly stuff that we're watching, that we're enjoying. And I make my peace with it by being very blunt about the dangers of the sport. I don't make excuses for just how brutal of an industry it is and just how brutal of a career it is. I can't take all the things I learn as a personal injury lawyer, suing people for traumatic brain injuries and other long-term harms that my clients sustain and prosecute these claims, and then turn on combat sports and pretend these men and women getting knocked unconscious and taking years off their life and quality of years off their life aren't suffering the same harms. And so I try not to put on the blinders when I watch the sport. It might be one day I just stop enjoying it, understanding the long-term harms that come from it. But I think I'm pretty open to those realities. And the reason, you followed my stuff for a while, I'm sort of a broken record. Like, I only have so many themes I pick up on, but the main one is trying to keep the regulators honest. Like, these men and women that run the state athletic commissions and provincial athletic commissions, they exist for fighter safety first and foremost. I mean, if you're cynical, you're going to say they exist to bring money into the state and bring business into the state. But if you want to look at it through a legal lens, they exist to make sure the sports are run relatively safely and to have some health and safety standards in place for fighters. And so when I watch this stuff, just want to be really blunt that, look, brain injury is real, CTE is real, mileage is real if somebody's sustained too much head trauma in their life. post-career consequences are real. I always plug this book, but Tris Dixon wrote a book earlier this year called Damage. I don't know if you've ever read it. He's a boxing guy, and it's maybe the best book I've ever read in combat sports. He didn't come at it with an anti-boxing agenda. The guy loves boxing, but he went around interviewing a whack of retired fighters, and it's just horror story after horror story after horror story. And he didn't do this to shine an ugly light on boxing. He was basically saying, look, I love boxing, but this is the end reality of it. And I found that book very influential. I think he does a better job telling the story than I ever could. But if you follow these sports and you're a fan of these athletes, you have to understand if they're in the game for any appreciable length of time, they're going to have some really ugly chapters on the back end of their life. And if you still enjoy the sport and you appreciate that, I'll just speak for myself, but for me, in terms of, just to answer your question of how do I still enjoy it, I'll advocate for fighter health and safety issues. I'll advocate for fair fighter pay issues. I'll advocate for better contract landscape to exist for fighters and promoters. I'll advocate for legislative change, and I'll be really blunt about the science of fighting. Right, when there's peer-reviewed articles that come out shedding more light on brain injuries and CTE, I try to give them the limited platform I can on combat sports law. Oh, sorry, I just got to mute my phone there. Sorry, I'm so incompetent. I can't even mute my phone here. But I was going to say, I actually really appreciate Erik Magraken at mixedmartialarts.com, because whenever I write these health and safety articles, he'll republish a lot of them on the UG as an article at mixedmartialarts.com. And that's the place where all the regulators go. If you're a state athletic commissioner and you're looking up somebody's official fight record, or you're putting in the fight record, you go to mixedmartialarts.com. So I know my articles, they might not reach a very large audience, but I know they reach the audience of the men and women who regulate the sport. And I like being sort of repetitive, making sure these issues are out there. And I love the fact that Erik does get my information in front of those regulators.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And I've seen you repost those when they get published there, your stuff. And one thing, I mean, you didn't mention it, but I'll mention it for you. I mean, you're definitely, I mean, I've seen you sponsor like fighters and stuff too, just because it's almost like I get it too, because again, I'm a hobbyist myself. I mean, I do jiu-jitsu for now and striking it. So I've been a mountain martial artist for almost 30 years now. But again, as a hobbyist, seeing these people pursue their passions, you're doing what you do to sort of help them on the end of with the legalities and the CTE stuff. But you also help them support when I've seen you post stuff that you're sponsoring fighters, you're also helping this, support their passions and their dreams too. So I just wanted to put that out there and add that to what you just said, because I mean, again, I don't want anyone to think that your site is like attacking anyway. It's more like educational for both fighter and fan. That's the way I take it anyway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I do enjoy sponsoring if there's a up and coming fighter that gets on my radar. So the last one I sponsored several times actually is Serena de Jesus, who is in Invicta now, and I think she's 1 or 2 wins away from making it to the UFC. So I'd love to see that happen. She's the first professional female fighter with an autism diagnosis. She's very vocal about it, and I'm more than happy to do what little I can to support this early part of her career. But yeah, look, I enjoy the fight game, and I enjoy just from the outside looking in or participating as a judge, like as a middle-aged white collar paper pusher. I mean, that's at the end of the day what I am. I enjoy participating in the sport as much as I can. And I don't really feel I have an agenda when I do write my articles. I try to be open-minded. Like I'm not, anti-promoter or anti-UFC or anti-fight game, but there are exploitative practices that it's tough to turn a blind eye to, right? When you see, like when you learn men and women are taking home 18% of the cut in the UFC, and then you point that out, and the promoter calls people that talk about it scumbag media.
Yeah.
They just don't like it talked about is the reality of it. And again, just I always tie this stuff together, but you talk about health and safety, and then you talk about fair fighter pay. Those things are connected, right? The guy who needs to take another fight and another fight and another fight. Well, if you're making, if 50% of the revenues are being split by the roster instead of 15, you do the math. That's to be in the same economic position. You got to fight 3 times as much under the current system as opposed to a 50-50 split. That's a lot more damage you have to take to make the similar dollars. And these are things that can be remedied. And I think the one thing I enjoy seeing is people understanding the poor state of fighter pay. Not everybody. There's some people that will always sort of root for the promoter. I don't get that mindset, but I know it exists. But more people seem to understand that there is exploitation in the sport. More people seem to understand that there are, legitimate health and safety concerns. And I think there's at least a slow shift of perception in that positive direction. But again, I don't sort of come at my articles trying to be anti any certain promoter. I just like to have reasoned discussions about this stuff.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that I think the last time I brought up you and your website was when all these fighters, high profile fighters, got cut from the UFC, and they were signing, Bellator, PFL. And I remember when I was having the conversation on this podcast with Matt, I mentioned that I was like, this is something I'd like to ask in combat sports law. I wonder if that's, and this is just me being a dummy, conspiracy theorist, whatever you want to call it. So that's why I'm glad I'm talking to you so I can ask. Do you think when you see that happening, that's just a move by the bigger promotion to kind of have the argument and say, no, we're not a monopoly and we're giving them opportunities versus the arguments against them? Like, do you think that's just happening as a, kind of like their chess play as far as the long game and protecting themselves?
Yeah, maybe, or it could just be simple cost savings, right? Like I was chatting about this the other night. I almost can't help myself. I'm like a moth to the flame. Every time I see the Contender Series, I can't help but see it for what I think it is, which is not just sort of cheap content out there, but it's almost a message. It's, hey, guys on the roster, look at how many people want to be in the UFC, and look at this flood of new talent. Every Tuesday, we're signing up on, whatever the contract is, 10 and 10 or 12 and 12. Guess what? People tune in to the cards because of the brand UFC. Sometimes you've got the big headliner that really pumps up the numbers, but sort of card after card after card, the promoter created their business so fighters are replaceable cogs in the machine. You're not dependent on certain people being on the card to tune in. They get the same number of eyeballs week in, week out. And again, you have the spikes. You've got the McGregors of the world. You've got the breakthrough stars that really push the numbers. But week in, week out, it's UFC that people know, not fourth fight on the undercard. People don't know that. And they could sign this flood of talent to keep giving them the content they need to fill their television deals that they need. They just got to produce the content, and they've got a new crop every week coming in through the Contender Series. And so if you have that guy on his 10th fight or 12th fight, and he's more of a known name, but he's not bringing in those massive pay-per-view numbers, the promoter's thinking, I don't got to pay this guy $100,000. I could pay that guy $12,000 and have that next fight on the card. And they're very, the promoter's very cost conscious in terms of how much they're paying the fighters. I mean, they draw a hard line in the sand. So I think that's probably more what's going on, as opposed to, hey, we've let some of these bigger names go and we're not a monopoly and other promoters could compete for this talent. I think they're just probably pinching pennies, if I had to guess.
No, that makes sense too. I mean, it's cheaper to build stars than keep a star, so
it seems the business model is get as many people under contract that might be breakthrough stars, and the one that like it's just a it's a meat grinder. Like you sign these men and women up, and it's part of what people love about the promotion. The good people fight good people. There's not a lot of career cultivation, like kill or be killed, and you killed a few in a row and now you're becoming more of a star. Well, we got you under a pretty nice long contract and we don't have to pay you too much. And geez, you lost a couple in a row. Well, out you go. There's the door. And I don't care if Bellator signs you up. You're some guy who couldn't hang it in the UFC. That's the way they could always spin it. So they've got a very clever and successful business model underway. I mean, they've got the feeders coming in and they've got a big bloated roster and they could make cuts whenever they have to make cuts. And they have enough of the top talent that when you get these breakthrough stars for, whatever moment makes somebody sort of get over, I don't think there's a lot of promoter predicting it. Like out of the blue, you have a guy like Masvidal, who's been there forever and 3-piece in a soda or whatever. And the guy's over all of a sudden, right? Even though it was an exciting fighter to follow for years before that. But so long as you have these guys under contract, when they make it big, then the promoter monetizes it. So
do you ever, does it ever, I mean, this is my last question, but does it ever, this is something I say a lot, like when people see fights get made versus fights that should get made, I always say, remember who owns the UFC now. That's Endeavor, WME, IMG was a modeling company. So when they put somebody that's more popular versus someone that's fought their way, through all the ranks and has been right there. Like for me, Justin Gaethje keeps getting the short end of the stick. You know what I mean? And they keep making the other fights that are more, fan friendly versus giving someone that literally just fought for the title not so long ago. So I was just wondering, I mean, does that ever cross your mind when you're looking at, when you see fight announcements and you're just like, wow, you're really just, this is just another modeling agency, but you make them fight each other.
Yeah. So, and that's maybe like the Sage Northcutt and the Paige Van Zandt era where, a lot of people were critical about the spotlight they were getting because they, like they were good fighters. I don't want to be negative, but they weren't elite of elite, but they were getting a push as if they were the elite of the roster. And people are critical of that. I guess if you're the promoter, you could push whatever you want to push and whatever's going to sell, whether it's the absolute best or not. But their business model largely does seem, I want to be careful how I phrase this, but it largely does seem to be to let the cream rise to the top, with the exception that you better be playing ball to get a shot at the title. John Nash put together one of the best videos I've ever seen. If you go to John Nash's Twitter handle, I think it's Hey Not the Face, and he's got a pinned tweet that just takes you to his YouTube channel. I can't remember what he calls his YouTube channel, but he breaks down the UFC monopoly.
Oh yeah,
claims.
I saw when he posted that. Yeah,
did you watch it? It's a hell of a good watch. It's only 30 minutes. Like if you're not into that stuff, it'll be a dry 30 minutes. But it's 30 minutes, and it'll explain the arguments of why the UFC is a legal monopoly, not the only show in town monopoly, but a legal monopoly. And part of what he drills out from there, and this is all stuff that came out through the antitrust lawsuit, but what he drills out is the average contract length of somebody who gets a shot to fight for the title, right? So if you're really good and you're number 1, number 2, number 3 ranking, whatever it is, it looks like the promoter wants you to be locked into a long-term deal before you get a shot at the strap. And so part of that is in play as well. And so we, the sort of consuming audience, we don't ever know the fine details of who's where in their contract and who's playing ball with the promoter and who's not in terms of the shots they get. But also, like if they could promote a pretty face that's going to sell, or if they're going after a certain market, like if they want to go after France or they want to go after China or they want to go after whatever they see as a new market where they could make a lot of money, I'm sure they're crunching numbers, and I'm sure some of their decisions about who headlines a card or who gets a shot at a title, I'm sure it's influenced by those kinds of factors. I mean, at the end of the day, the dollar is king. This is a promotion now owned by a public company, right? So it's on the stock exchange. Anybody could buy some shares, and they're accountable to investors to keep fattening that bottom line. And so I think anything the UFC does, they're doing it with that in mind.
Yeah, no, that's definitely food for thought. But Erik, thank you so much for taking time to talk today. I mean, I know you do other content. You have your own YouTube channel and stuff that you're doing, so your socials that you want to put out there. So by all means, let folks know where to follow you outside of your website.
Yeah, well, combatsportslaw.com, there's the main stuff if anybody's interested in the types of topics we covered here today. But Twitter is where I waste too much of my life. So if you just follow my name's my handle on all my social media, Erik Magraken. So you could follow me there, and if you interact and you're not an asshole, I'm happy to follow people back. That's my very simple rules for social media interaction. Anybody who's not a jerk, I'm happy to interact, even if we don't agree on things.
Yeah, you can discuss things and not be a dick. Yeah,
yeah, no, that's right. That's sort of a good set of rules for life.
Exactly. And really quick, the book Damage, you said it's by Tris Dixon, Tris.
Yeah, and then Dixon, Dixon. So if you want a hell of a good read, it's sort of like a page turner from the get-go, but it might make you fall out of love with combat sports as well. It's one of those very sobering reads where there's just not a lot of happy endings. And like these MMA stars of today, and you're seeing it a bit, right? You've got the retired generations already. You're seeing some hard miles on some of the pioneers of the sport. But 10, 15 more years, there's going to be a lot of similar horror stories that exist in boxing. Like that last 10, 15 years of a fighter's life is often very, very sad. And so Damage paints that picture for boxing. And again, if you love the sport, just have your eyes wide open that is happening in MMA, and it's going to continue to happen, just because if brain trauma is part of the occupation, those are real consequences, and there's nothing magical about the sport that makes the consequences disappear just because it's on pay-per-view.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, thank you so much. You definitely make a lot of strong points. And again, guys like you, I think the sport needs guys like you to be on social, to have websites like this. I mean, there's not enough out there. There's too many. There's too much rah, and just going with the flow and not recognizing, that these athletes aren't just pieces of meat to go out there and for our entertainment. They're human beings too. That's kind of why I cover the sport too. I try to tell those stories, but again, that's why I don't make a lot of money, because not everybody wants to hear them. So, but thank you so much. Again, combatsportslaw.com. I usually refer to it a lot during the website, but this is pre-recorded for folks that will be on the September 22nd episode of Coast to Coast Combat Hour. But thank you again, Erik. Appreciate it.
Ed, my pleasure. Thanks.